Hey, that's terrible. Is that how you treat your mother-in-law?
She's like a wicked wife. Not cooking for your mother-in-law's meals.
Seriously, what a wicked wife.
Relatives were blaming and accusing me. Then, my husband raised his voice.
The blame isn't on my wife. If you still speak ill of Tanya even after hearing this, I will cut ties with every single one of you right here.
Saying so, my husband held up his smartphone towards the relatives. The relatives were left speechless by the abusive voice of my mother-in-law coming from the smartphone. Living together with my mother-in-law. That was the condition for marrying William, my husband. My name is Tanya. It's just my mother-in-law, my husband, and me living together in my in-laws' house. Initially, I wasn't completely without concerns about living together. The joy of marrying the man I love overshadowed any concerns, and I believed we could make it work. That is, until my mother-in-law escalated things to this extent. Looking back, there were signs before we got married. It was when I heard that my mother-in-law caught a cold, and I decided to make a vegetable-rich stew to visit her. While my mother-in-law showed gratitude in front of William, as soon as he left the room, she said something else entirely.
It's quite rich in flavor, isn't it?
Then,
I can't eat this at all.
She put down her spoon. My seasoning was off. I should have thought of a different recipe for my unwell mother-in-law. At that moment, I reflected on my shortcomings. At the same time, I couldn't help but feel a bit uneasy being criticized for my cooking in his absence. The cold gaze my mother-in-law gave me with a sigh is something I can't forget even now. A few months later, we got married and started living together.
Tanya, can't you even do this? You really are a naive young lady, aren't you?
She makes sarcastic remarks on various occasions. Especially when my husband was away on business trips, her actions got worse. And so, my mother-in-law's presence became a source of distress for me. However, I didn't tell my husband about it in the beginning. He was already busy and I didn't want to burden him with unnecessary worries. Plus, since my mother-in-law acted nice in front of him, I thought he might not believe me even if I told him the truth. That's what I thought. Furthermore, I felt ashamed to let anyone know about the domestic concerns so early in our marriage. Therefore, I couldn't bring myself to confide in my friends or my own family.
Could you wash all these dishes again? And don't forget to mop over there.
Her orders increased day by day, and I began to be treated like a servant. When my husband went on long business trips, the atmosphere at home became like hell. I thought I was doing everything I could, but I was constantly criticized for not doing enough housework. She would complain about the brands of groceries I bought, saying, "I hate this brand," and there was always a complaint no matter what I did. Finally, I reached a breaking point and decided to confide everything in my husband. I couldn't go on like this anymore. The pressure and anxiety had become unbearable. My husband was incredibly shocked when he heard my story.
I had no idea that was happening. I'm sorry for putting you through such a tough time.
It's not something you need to apologize for, William.
No, I should have noticed sooner. But still, I can't believe my mom would say such things.
It seemed my husband hadn't realized how coldly my mother-in-law was treating me all this time. He was in disbelief, but he listened sympathetically without doubting my story. I felt reassured that my husband was on my side and that he truly loved me. I still think it was the right decision to trust him and open up about everything back then. The next day, my husband talked to my mother-in-law about everything. Thanks to that, she stopped making negative remarks. At least, that's what I thought for just one day. The following day, she said something like this.
Why did you have to make William talk to me? That poor boy, being dragged into his wife's petty complaints.
Petty complaints? Does she just see it as nothing more than a wife's whining?
I've been trying to help you in various ways, so you should be grateful to me.
My mother-in-law spoke as if everything she did was out of kindness. The mistreatment didn't stop there. In fact, it only seemed to worsen and accelerate further. Before I could take a bath, she would empty the bathtub. She would wear my shoes without permission, go out, and return with them covered in mud. Then, one night when my husband was away on a business trip.
Tanya, you're still terrible at cooking. Is this pork undercooked?
It should be thoroughly cooked. Shall I cook it again just to be sure?
Forget it. I don't want to eat your cooking anymore. I don't need anything from you anymore.
The meat was already thoroughly cooked, but I reached for the plate to cook it again just to be safe. Then, my mother-in-law swept my hand, along with the plate, away. The plate shattered, and the freshly cooked meal scattered across the floor. She walked past it as if nothing had happened and left the room. Why did it have to come to this? I couldn't sleep that night. I had no strength left to argue back or hope that my mother-in-law would change someday. I just kept crying. When my husband returned from his business trip, my husband quickly noticed my distressed demeanor.
What? This is outrageous. Even though she's your own mother, this is unacceptable.
My husband, utterly disgusted, confronted my mother-in-law the next day in front of me.
You're despicable. I'm deeply disappointed in you, Mom. It's horrifying to think I'm the son of such a parent.
My husband became remarkably emotional, shouting at my mother-in-law. His disappointment and anger towards his mother must have been immense. Perhaps shocked to receive criticism from her own son, my mother-in-law's face turned pale. However, she never admitted fault.
Right, everyone's coming today, so I should start getting ready.
She abruptly changed the subject. That day, we had plans for relatives to come over for a meal. My mother-in-law hurriedly headed to the kitchen. I'll help too. I followed her and offered to help.
Tanya, you don't want to be around me, do you? It's okay if you skip today.
Her tone was gentle, but she couldn't resist throwing in a hint of sarcasm. Despite this, my husband and I managed to compose ourselves and began assisting with the preparations for the meal. Later, as the relatives gathered, I placed the dishes on the table.
Hey, there's one missing here. There's no dish in front of your mother-in-law.
In response to this, I said, I cooked today, but apparently my mother-in-law doesn't want to eat my food.
Ha!
I've been told not to do anything by my mother-in-law herself.
Wait, are you serious?
Hey, that's terrible. Is that how you treat your husband's mother?
She's like a wicked wife. Not cooking for your mother-in-law's meals.
Seriously, what a wicked wife.
The relatives were blaming and accusing me. Then, my husband raised his voice.
It's not my wife's fault. Don't call her a wicked wife. You don't know anything, so don't say such things about Tanya.
Saying so, my husband held up his smartphone towards the relatives.
If you still speak ill of Tanya even after hearing this, I'll cut ties with everyone here.
What came from the smartphone were the hysterical tirades of my mother-in-law.
Just looking at you makes me irritated. You're in the way. Get out of here.
It was a series of verbal abuse directed at me.
Forget it. I don't want to eat your cooking anymore. I don't need anything from you anymore.
I had been recording my mother-in-law's habitual verbal abuse. It was a suggestion from my husband to protect myself. The relatives were left speechless after hearing the audio. For me, the time felt incredibly long as the pain of being subjected to verbal abuse resurfaced. My husband explained that it was his instruction not to prepare a meal specifically for my mother-in-law. I received apologies from the relatives, and my mother-in-law was served a meal by them on the spot. Eventually, the situation was resolved. My mother-in-law sat there, stunned and speechless with her head down. That night, after the relatives had left, my husband made it clear to my mother-in-law.
I've had enough. We can't live together anymore. We're moving out.
For the first time, my mother-in-law apologized.
I'm sorry. I apologize. Maybe I was relying too much on Tanya. I'm getting old and I've been feeling lonely. I promise I won't say mean things anymore. Let's live together.
Seeing my mother-in-law bowing weakly, I didn't feel sorry for her. I thought it was too late. She was the one who created this situation herself. We left my in-laws' house afterward. Now, we're living alone in our new place. It's the first time since our marriage that we've been able to enjoy peaceful days. My mother-in-law often sends WhatsApp messages to my husband, but he doesn't reply at all and seems to be keeping his distance from her. We have no intention of returning to my in-laws' house for a while. Even the relatives who used to gather there for meals a few times a year no longer visit my mother-in-law. I do feel a bit sorry for my mother-in-law being left alone. However, she brought this upon herself. I vowed to cherish the happy moments with my husband William and live life to the fullest from now on.